Emily missed her last bus home, cursing under her breath as the taillights disappeared around the corner. The November rain had soaked through her thin jacket, and her phone battery had died 3 blocks ago, leaving her stranded in an unfamiliar part of the city. She pulled her waitress uniform closer to her body, the tips from her double shift barely enough to cover this month's rent. The medical bills for her grandmother's treatment loomed over her like the dark clouds above, threatening to wash away what little stability she had managed to build. The shortcut through the narrow alley seemed like a bad idea, but the thought of walking 4 more miles in the freezing rain was worse. Emily ducked under a fire escape, seeking momentary shelter from the downpour, when a sound stopped her, faint, but unmistakably human. Behind a stack of discarded wooden pallets, she found him, a boy, perhaps 7 or 8, curled into a tight ball. His expensive clothing was soaked through, his small body trembling violently with what she immediately recognized as fever. His eyes, glassy with delirium, widened with fear when he saw her. Emily raised her hands instinctively, making herself appear smaller and less threatening. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. The boy didn't respond, just stared at her with those huge dark eyes that seemed to hold a universe of fear. Emily's mind raced through possibilities. Runaway, lost, kidnapped. None of them good explanations for a well-dressed child alone in an alley during a storm. "I'm Emily," she tried again, crouching down slowly. "Can you tell me your name?" The boy's lips trembled, but no sound came out. His skin, even in the dim light, looked frighteningly pale against his dark hair. The responsible thing would be to call the police, but her dead phone made that impossible. The nearest hospital was 20 blocks away, and no taxi would stop in this neighborhood after dark. Emily made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. "I live just a few streets from here," she said, slowly removing her jacket despite the cold. "I'm going to take you somewhere warm, get you dry, and then we can figure things out, okay?" She draped the jacket over his small shoulders. When she reached out, the boy flinched but didn't pull away. His skin burned against her fingers, confirming what she already knew. His fever was dangerously high. Emily gathered him into her arms, surprised by how little he weighed. The walk to her tiny apartment felt endless, the boy's fevered body growing heavier with each step. Emily whispered reassurances that she wasn't entirely sure were true. "You're going to be okay. I've got you. You're safe now." By the time she fumbled with her keys at her apartment door, the boy had stopped shivering and fallen unnervingly still in her arms. Emily laid him gently on her worn sofa, already reaching for the medicine cabinet, unaware that her act of kindness had just placed her directly in the crosshairs of the city's most dangerous man. The thermometer read 104 degrees, alarmingly high for a child his size. Emily worked methodically, stripping off his wet clothes and wrapping him in her softest blankets, years of caring for her grandmother having taught her the basics of nursing. She crushed children's acetaminophen into apple juice, gently lifting his head so he could drink. His expensive clothing lay in a soggy pile: cashmere sweater, tailored pants, Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Throughout the night, Emily placed cool compresses on his forehead, changing them when they grew warm from his fever. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words she couldn't understand, his small hand gripping her sleeve with surprising strength. Around 3 a.m, his eyes suddenly opened with startling clarity. "Papa will be angry," he whispered, the first coherent sentence he'd spoken. "They took me from the car, said they'd hurt him if I made noise." Emily's blood ran cold at the implication. "Who took you?" she asked gently, trying to keep the alarm from her voice. The boy's eyes filled with tears before he slipped back into fevered sleep, leaving her question unanswered. Dawn was breaking when his fever finally broke. Emily had nodded off in the armchair beside him, waking to find a pair of deep brown eyes studying her intently. "You helped me," he stated simply, his voice stronger than before. "I'm Lucas," he offered without prompting, sitting up slightly against the pillow. His accent was faint, but unmistakable, suggesting an education far more refined than the public school system Emily had navigated. Emily smiled, relief washing over her that he was finally lucid. "I'm Emily. How are you feeling?" She reached out to check his forehead, noting with satisfaction that his skin felt much cooler to the touch. Lucas looked around her modest apartment with undisguised curiosity. The mismatched furniture, the textbooks stacked on the coffee table, the framed photo of her grandmother. "This isn't like my house," he observed without judgment. Before Emily could respond, A sound from outside caught her attention. Car engines, multiple and powerful, stopping directly in front of her building. Lucas tensed immediately, his eyes widening with a mixture of relief and fear. Emily moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the street below. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows had parked haphazardly, blocking the entire road. Men in dark suits emerged, moving with military precision. The last man to exit the center vehicle wore no tactical gear, just an impeccably tailored suit that even Emily could tell cost thousands. His face was set in a mask of controlled fury as he surveyed the street, and she knew with absolute certainty that Lucas's father had arrived to reclaim what was his. Emily felt a surge of panic as heavy footsteps echoed up the stairwell. She glanced at Lucas, who had gone completely still, eyes fixed on the door. "That's my papa," he whispered, his voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. Before Emily could respond, 3 sharp knocks rattled her apartment door. She approached cautiously, aware of how this must look, a waitress with a wealthy child in her rundown apartment. With trembling fingers, she turned the lock. The door swung open to reveal the man she'd seen from the window, flanked by 2 imposing figures. His dark eyes swept past her, instantly locating Lucas on the sofa. "Papa!" Lucas called out, his voice stronger than it had been all night. The man's expression transformed, relief cracking through his mask of control. He strode past Emily without acknowledgement, kneeling beside his son. "Lucas," he breathed, cupping the boy's face with hands that looked capable of both violence and tenderness. Emily stood awkwardly by the door, acutely aware of the 2 men scanning her apartment with practiced efficiency. One nodded almost imperceptibly to the father, a silent confirmation that the space contained no threats. "You took my son," the man said finally, turning to face Emily. His voice was deceptively soft, but she heard the dangerous current beneath it. The accusation hung in the air between them, heavy with implied consequences. Emily's fear gave way to indignation. "I found your son in an alley during a storm with a dangerously high fever," she replied, surprised by her own steadiness. "I brought him here because my phone was dead and he needed immediate help." Something shifted in the man's expression, not quite belief, but a willingness to consider. His eyes moved to the makeshift sickbed she'd created, the medicine on the table, the bowl of water with washcloths beside it. "She made the fever go away, Papa," Lucas interjected, his small voice somehow commanding attention from everyone in the room. "She sang to me when I was scared and stayed awake all night to make me better." The father's gaze returned to Emily, more calculating now. "What's your name?" he asked, as if her answer might determine whether she lived or died. The air in the small apartment seemed to thicken with tension. "Emily Chen," she answered, lifting her chin slightly. "I'm a waitress and nursing student. I did what anyone with basic human decency would do for a sick child. Now, who are you, and why was your son alone in an alley during a storm?" His eyebrows rose fractionally. Surprise, perhaps respect, at her directness. "Gabriel Castillo," he replied after a pause. "And while I appreciate your assistance, you should understand that involving yourself with my family comes with complications." Emily watched as Gabriel lifted his son into his arms with surprising gentleness. Lucas's head rested against his father's shoulder, eyes already drooping with exhaustion, despite the drama unfolding around him. "Your son mentioned people taking him from a car," Emily said, keeping her voice low but firm. "He needs a hospital, not just fever reducers and cool compresses. He may have been drugged." Gabriel's expression hardened, but he nodded to one of his men who immediately stepped outside, speaking quietly into a phone. "A doctor is already en route to my residence," Gabriel explained. "Lucas will receive the best care available." Emily gathered Lucas's now dry clothes, noticing how Gabriel's eyes tracked her every movement. The expensive fabric felt foreign in her hands, a reminder of the vast gulf between their worlds. "You seem to care about my son's welfare," Gabriel observed, his tone impossible to read. "That's rare in my experience. Most people see Lucas as leverage, not as a child deserving protection." Emily handed over the small bundle of clothing. "I don't know what world you live in, Mr. Castillo, but in mine, children aren't political pawns." She met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated despite the power imbalance crackling between them. Gabriel's lips twitched, almost a smile. "In my world, Miss Chen, everything and everyone has a price." He nodded to one of his men, who produced an envelope and placed it on her coffee table. "Consider this compensation for your trouble." Emily didn't even glance at the envelope. "I didn't help your son for money. I did it because it was right." The words hung in the air, simple but somehow defiant in the face of Gabriel's obvious wealth and power. Something shifted in Gabriel's expression. Surprise, perhaps, before his features settled into a calculating mask once more. Then perhaps there's something else you want. Your apartment suggests financial struggles, and Lucas mentioned you're studying nursing. Emily's heart raced at the implication. What exactly are you offering? She kept her voice steady despite the dangerous territory she was entering. This man was clearly accustomed to buying whatever, or whoever, he wanted. My son needs a private nurse during his recovery. Someone he trusts, Gabriel said, his eyes never leaving her face. Someone with medical knowledge who has already proven they can remain calm in crisis. $5,000 a week, plus room and board at my estate. Emily's breath caught at the figure. More than enough to cover her grandmother's treatments and her own tuition. But the rational part of her brain screamed warnings about strange men with armed guards and children who get kidnapped from cars. The Castillo estate materialized like a fortress rising from the mist as their convoy of black SUVs approached. Wrought iron gates taller than 2 men swung open silently, security cameras tracking their movement with mechanical precision. Emily sat rigid in the back seat, her single duffel bag containing everything she deemed essential for what Gabriel had termed temporary employment. The 1-month contract she'd signed bore a figure that made her head spin, enough to clear her grandmother's medical debt entirely. As they pulled into a circular driveway, Emily caught her first full view of the mansion, a sprawling stone structure that looked more like a small hotel than a home. Men with discreet earpieces patrolled the perimeter, their vigilance suggesting dangers beyond simple wealth protection. Gabriel had said little during the drive, his attention divided between hushed phone conversations and checking on Lucas, who'd slept peacefully against Emily's shoulder. The boy had refused to let go of her hand when they'd left her apartment, cementing Gabriel's unusual job offer. Inside, the mansion's opulence was tempered by an undercurrent of functionality. Emily noted security keypads beside ornate door frames and subtle camera placements amid crystal chandeliers. This was a beautiful cage designed to keep threats out, or perhaps to keep secrets in. A woman in a crisp uniform appeared, introducing herself as Mrs. Alvarez, the housekeeper. Her eyes held a mixture of curiosity and wariness as she assessed Emily, clearly wondering what role this plainly dressed newcomer would play in the household hierarchy. "Lucas's room is this way," Mrs. Alvarez said, leading them up a grand staircase. "The doctor is waiting to examine him." Gabriel carried his sleeping son, his movements so careful it was as if he carried precious glass rather than a child. The boy's bedroom looked like it had been plucked from a luxury department store catalog. Too perfect, too untouched. Only a scattered collection of dinosaur figurines on a shelf suggested a child actually lived there, rather than just existed within the pristine space. A distinguished man waited inside, medical bag already open on a side table. "Dr. Whitaker," Gabriel acknowledged with a nod. "This is Emily Chen, Lucas's new nurse." The title still felt foreign to Emily, an identity she hadn't possessed 3 hours ago. The examination confirmed Emily's amateur diagnosis: exhaustion and fever, likely exacerbated by exposure to the elements. "Doctor." Whitaker spoke in hushed tones about blood tests and monitoring, phrases that made Gabriel's jaw tighten with barely controlled rage. After the doctor left, Gabriel lingered in the doorway of Lucas's room, watching Emily arrange medications on the bedside table. "You should know," he said quietly, "the people who took my son aren't finished. By helping him, you've placed yourself in their sights too." Emily's hands stilled as the full weight of her situation crashed down upon her. She wasn't just a nurse in a mansion. She was now a player in whatever dangerous game had nearly cost Lucas his life, a game whose rules she didn't understand and whose other players would see her as nothing more than a new piece on the board. 3 days into her stay at the Castillo estate, Emily developed a routine that revolved entirely around Lucas's recovery. The boy's fever had subsided, but he remained unusually quiet, speaking only when directly addressed, except with Emily, to whom he would whisper stories and questions when they were alone. One afternoon while Lucas napped, Emily noticed Ramon, Gabriel's head of security, speaking intently with another guard near the garden. Their eyes continually darted to the 3rd-floor window, Lucas's bedroom, with a vigilance that made Emily's skin prickle with unease. Later, while organizing Lucas's medications in the estate's kitchen, Emily overheard a heated conversation in Gabriel's native Spanish, a language she'd studied in college but rarely mentioned to her new employer. The words "traitor interno" and "informante" made her freeze. The realization that someone inside the estate might be feeding information to the Navarros, explaining the heightened security and Gabriel's increasingly guarded demeanor. That evening, Emily found herself summoned to Gabriel's study, a room of leather and mahogany that smelled of expensive cigars and old books. Gabriel sat behind a massive desk, surveillance monitors embedded discreetly in the wall behind him, showing various angles of the estate grounds. "How much do you know about what I do, Ms. Chen?" Gabriel asked without preamble. His fingers traced the edge of a manila folder that Emily suspected contained information about her, information she had never shared during their brief acquaintance. Emily considered her answer carefully. "You're wealthy, powerful, and someone tried to use your son to get to you," she replied evenly. "Beyond that, I've focused on my job, Lucas's health, not on investigating my employer's business interests." A ghost of a smile touched Gabriel's lips. "Diplomatic," he acknowledged. "The truth is simpler and more complicated. I control much of this city's commerce, both legitimate and otherwise, and recently acquired interests that others believe should be theirs." He slid a photograph across the desk, Lucas playing in the garden with Emily the previous afternoon. The angle suggested it had been taken from outside the property walls, beyond the security perimeter that Gabriel had assured her was impenetrable. "The Navarro family," Gabriel continued, his voice deceptively calm, "believes that by taking Lucas, they can force me to relinquish certain business holdings. They've been watching the estate, cataloging routines, identifying potential weaknesses, including you." Emily stared at the photograph, a chill spreading through her chest. The red dot beside Lucas's head hadn't been visible to her yesterday, but in the photograph, its meaning was unmistakable. A laser sight from a high-powered rifle, a message rather than an attempted assassination. "Why are you telling me this?" Emily asked, pushing the photograph back across the desk, suddenly eager to break physical contact with the evidence of how close Lucas had come to harm under her watch. "Because tomorrow, Lucas has a doctor's appointment that cannot be postponed," Gabriel replied, his expression grave. "And despite my security team's recommendations, he refuses to go without you. I need you to understand the risk." Emily thought of Lucas's small hand in hers, his whispered confidences, the trust he'd placed in her when he had no reason to trust anyone. "I won't let him go alone," she said simply. "Tell me what I need to do to keep him safe." The trip to the specialist's office had been meticulously planned, routes mapped, security positioned, timing precise. Emily sat in the back of the armored SUV with Lucas, his small body tense despite his excitement about finally leaving the estate after nearly a week of confinement. "Will the doctor hurt me?" Lucas whispered, his eyes wide as he clutched his dinosaur figurine, a triceratops that Emily had learned was named Commander Spike, his most treasured possession and constant companion during his recovery. Emily squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Dr. Winters just needs to check your blood to make sure you're getting better," she explained. "It might pinch for a second, but I'll be right there the whole time." The medical building appeared ordinary, but Emily noticed the subtle security presence. Men in suits pretending to read newspapers in the lobby, others positioned strategically near exits. Gabriel had insisted on entering separately, not wanting to draw attention to their group. Outside the window, Emily noticed a delivery van that had been parked since their arrival, its driver nowhere to be seen. She made a mental note to mention it to Ramon, remembering his briefing about identifying suspicious patterns and trusting her instincts. A text message lit up Emily's phone, her grandmother asking how her new nursing job was going. The simple message created a pang of longing for the normal life she'd left behind, a world where dangerous men didn't lurk in delivery vans and children weren't targets. The doctor's explanation of Lucas's improved blood work faded into background noise as Emily spotted a reflection in the glass cabinet, the same delivery van driver now inside the building, speaking intently with a security guard who hadn't been part of Gabriel's team. Emily casually moved to block Lucas from the doorway's line of sight, her hand finding the emergency button Gabriel had insisted she carry, a small device designed to silently alert his security team to potential threats without causing panic. In the examination room, Lucas sat bravely as the doctor drew blood samples. "You're doing great," Emily encouraged, holding his free hand, while keeping her body positioned between Lucas and the window, just as Ramon had instructed her. The attack came not from outside, but from within. A nurse Emily hadn't seen before entered with a tray of supplies, her movements too precise, her eyes too calculating. Emily recognized the threat a split second before Gabriel's security team, lunging forward just as the woman reached for something beneath her tray. Emily slammed into the false nurse, knocking them both to the floor as a syringe skittered across the tile. The woman recovered quickly, her facade of medical professionalism vanishing as she struck Emily hard across the jaw with trained precision. Stars exploded across Emily's vision, but adrenaline kept her moving. She grabbed the woman's wrists, preventing her from reaching what Emily now saw was a concealed weapon. "Lucas, under the table!" she shouted, using every ounce of strength to keep the attacker pinned. The door burst open as Gabriel and Ramon rushed in, alerted by the commotion. The would-be kidnapper twisted violently in Emily's grip, managing to break free and lunge toward where Lucas had hidden, his terrified face visible beneath the examination table. Without hesitation, Emily threw herself into the attacker's path. The impact of the woman's kick sent pain lancing through Emily's ribs, but she had accomplished her goal, giving Gabriel's security team the precious seconds needed to neutralize the threat. In the chaotic aftermath, Emily found herself cradling a sobbing Lucas, murmuring reassurances despite her own pain. You're safe, she repeated, meeting Gabriel's gaze over his son's head, his expression a complex mixture of fury, relief, and something that looked remarkably like respect. The ride back to the estate passed in tense silence, broken only by Lucas's occasional sniffles. Emily winced as the SUV hit a pothole, the pain in her ribs flaring sharply. Gabriel noticed immediately, his observant eyes missing nothing. "You're injured," he stated. Not a question, but a realization tinged with what might have been guilt. The estate doctor confirmed 3 bruised ribs and a mild concussion, injuries that would heal, but would require rest. Emily found herself installed in a guest suite near Lucas's room, her protests about returning to work overruled by both father and son. "You saved my life twice," Lucas said solemnly, as he placed Commander Spike carefully on her bedside table. "He'll protect you while you sleep." The gesture, so childlike and earnest, brought unexpected tears to Emily's eyes. Gabriel visited each evening after Lucas was asleep, bringing updates on the investigation into the attack. The woman had been part of a sophisticated operation, organized by the Navarro family, designed to separate Lucas from his protectors in the controlled environment of the medical office. "You were never supposed to be in danger," Gabriel said on the 3rd night, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Your job was to care for Lucas, not to place yourself between him and harm." He sat in the armchair beside her bed, his usual commanding presence softened in the dim lamplight. During her recovery, Emily received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Alvarez arrived with a leather-bound photo album containing pictures of Lucas's mother. "He hasn't looked at these since she passed," the housekeeper confided, her voice thick with emotion. "But he asked for them yesterday, said he wanted to show you." News from the outside world reached Emily through carefully filtered channels. Gabriel had arranged for her grandmother to receive specialized care at an exclusive medical facility, explaining it away as a healthcare grant, rather than revealing the true source of the sudden generosity. Emily discovered a new wing of the mansion she hadn't previously explored, a library filled with medical textbooks and nursing journals, Gabriel's silent acknowledgement of her interrupted education, and a path to continue it within these protected walls. The first time Lucas called her Emmy instead of Miss Emily, she felt something fundamental shift in her relationship to this unusual household. No longer an employee performing a service, but something closer to family, with all the complications and joys such connections entailed. Emily shifted carefully, mindful of her healing ribs. "I don't regret it," she replied simply. "Lucas is a child who deserves protection, regardless of what world he was born into." The statement hung between them, a truth that transcended their different circumstances. Gabriel studied her with an intensity that would have made her uncomfortable weeks ago, but now felt familiar. "Your contract ends in 3 days, he observed, his tone deliberately neutral. "I assume you'll be eager to return to your previous life." Emily thought about her empty apartment, her waitressing job that barely covered expenses, the nursing program she'd been struggling to complete between shifts. Then she thought about Lucas's nightmares that only she could soothe, his gradual return to the chattering, curious child he must have been before trauma silenced him. "Lucas needs stability," she said carefully. "He's been through too much change already." Emily met Gabriel's gaze directly, no longer intimidated by the power he wielded. "And I think you could use someone who isn't afraid to tell you the truth." Something shifted in Gabriel's expression. Vulnerability, perhaps, or recognition. "And what truth is that, Emily?" he asked, using her first name for the first time since they'd met. "That your business, whatever it entails, creates enemies who see Lucas as leverage, not as a child," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. That he needs more than protection. He needs normalcy, routine, someone who cares about him as a person, not an heir. Gabriel didn't speak for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. "And you believe you can provide that?" he finally asked, the question containing layers of meaning Emily wasn't sure she was ready to explore. "I know I can give him consistency and care," she answered honestly. "The question is whether you're willing to let someone into your world who won't simply follow orders, someone who will challenge you when Lucas's well-being is at stake." A slow smile spread across Gabriel's face, transforming his usual stern features. "I'm offering you a permanent position, Emily, not just as Lucas's nurse, but as his guardian when business takes me away from home. A partner in ensuring his safety and happiness." Emily's breath caught at the implications of his words. "That sounds like more than employment," she observed, her voice barely above a whisper. The air between them seemed charged with possibilities neither had voiced but both recognized. Gabriel reached out, his hand covering hers with unexpected gentleness. "I've built my empire through calculated risks," he said quietly. "But inviting you into our lives might be the first decision I've made based solely on trust rather than strategy. Thank you all for following this story. If you've enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is essential for me to continue creating content.